There is a pattern unfolding across the United States right now that most people are completely missing, not because the information is hidden, but because most people simply are not trained to read the signals. Quietly, methodically, and with extraordinary precision, some of the wealthiest and most strategically minded individuals and institutions on the planet are purchasing massive amounts of rural land across 5 specific American states. Not urban land. Not commercial real estate. Raw, remote, agricultural and forested land, the kind that has no immediate financial return, no luxury appeal, and no obvious investment logic by conventional standards. And yet the pace of these purchases is accelerating. The question that every rational, thinking person should be asking is not who is buying this land, that information is increasingly public, but rather why, and why now, and why these specific geographic locations above all others. To understand what is really happening, you have to step back from the financial headlines and start thinking like an emergency management specialist, a geologist, a hydrologist, and a long-term systems analyst all at once. Because the people making these purchases are not doing so based on sentiment or speculation. They are responding to a convergence of real, measurable, and deeply alarming data points that the broader public has not yet synthesized into a coherent picture. When you examine water table maps, FEMA flood projection models, USDA soil productivity indexes, regional grid vulnerability assessments, and long-range climate stress forecasts all simultaneously, something remarkable and deeply unsettling begins to emerge. Certain regions of the United States are quietly being identified, through rigorous scientific modeling, as the most viable long-term habitable zones on the continent. And land in those zones is disappearing from the open market at a rate that has no historical precedent. The 5 states at the center of this phenomenon are not random. They share a specific combination of characteristics that, when evaluated through the lens of systems resilience and long-term carrying capacity, make them extraordinarily valuable in ways that have nothing to do with current population density or economic output. These states sit above some of the most stable and replenishable freshwater aquifers on the continent. They experience comparatively low exposure to the compound climate stressors, extreme heat events, atmospheric river flooding, prolonged drought cycles, and wildfire corridors that are already beginning to degrade the habitability and agricultural productivity of large portions of the American South, Southwest, and coastal regions. They have soil compositions that rank among the highest in the world for long-term agricultural sustainability without heavy chemical inputs. And critically, several of them sit at geographic elevations and latitudes that climate modeling projects will become significantly more temperate and agriculturally productive over the coming decades as thermal bands shift northward. What most people fundamentally misunderstand about this land acquisition trend is that they frame it through a financial investment lens, assuming these buyers are simply seeking future profit from rising property values. That framing, while not entirely wrong, misses the deeper and more urgent logic at work. The buyers who are moving most aggressively are not primarily motivated by return on investment in the traditional sense. They are motivated by resource security. There is a profound and growing body of scientific literature, spanning hydrology, agricultural science, energy systems research, and climate resilience engineering, that points toward a future in which the most critical constraints on human civilization will not be technological or financial, but physical and geographic. Access to clean, reliable freshwater. Access to productive, non-degraded agricultural soil. Access to stable, defensible, climatically moderate land that can support both food production and human habitation without extraordinary external energy inputs. The science behind freshwater scarcity alone should command every serious person's full attention. The United States is currently withdrawing water from its major aquifer systems, most critically the High Plains Ogallala Aquifer, at rates that exceed natural recharge by margins that hydrologists describe as geologically catastrophic in their long-term implications. The Ogallala, which underlies approximately 174,000 square miles and supplies roughly 30% of all groundwater used for irrigation in the United States, is being depleted in certain regions at rates of 1 to 3 feet per year, while natural recharge rates measure in fractions of an inch annually. The mathematical endpoint of that equation is not speculative. It is a matter of established hydrological record. When that aquifer reaches critical depletion thresholds in its most stressed zones, the agricultural systems dependent upon it will face collapse pressures that no amount of technology or policy intervention can fully offset on the timescales that matter for food security planning. This is precisely why the states attracting the most aggressive land acquisition activity are those situated above alternative, more stable, and better recharged freshwater systems. The Great Lakes Basin alone holds approximately 21% of the world's surface fresh water. States with access to that basin, or to well-recharged regional aquifer systems fed by consistent precipitation patterns, represent a fundamentally different hydrological future than the water-stressed regions that dominate current American agricultural output. When sophisticated buyers with access to long-range scientific modeling begin concentrating their land acquisitions in those specific hydrological zones, they are not making a bet on real estate markets. They are making a calculated assessment about which physical geographies will retain the foundational conditions necessary for sustained human productivity and habitation across a multi-decade horizon of compounding environmental stress. The survival implications of understanding this dynamic are profound and immediate, because the window during which ordinary people can act on the same information that is driving institutional and elite land acquisition is narrowing faster than most realize. The narrowing of that window is not a metaphor or an abstraction. It is a measurable, documentable reality that can be tracked through county land registry data, agricultural real estate transaction records, and water rights filing databases that are technically public but rarely synthesized into a coherent analytical picture for general audiences. In certain counties across Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Wyoming, the 5 states most consistently appearing at the center of this acquisition trend, average land prices per acre have increased at rates between 20 and 40% over the past 3 years alone, dramatically outpacing both inflation and the broader real estate market. That price acceleration is not being driven by local population growth, by industrial development, or by any conventional economic demand signal. It is being driven by external capital, institutional, corporate, and private high-net-worth capital, that is flowing into these specific geographies with a purposefulness and a consistency that land economists describe as unlike anything they have observed in modern market history. What makes this pattern even more analytically significant is the specific character of the land being targeted. It is not resort land. It is not land adjacent to growing urban centers, and it is not land with immediate commercial development potential. The acquisitions are overwhelmingly concentrated in parcels with 3 specific characteristics: reliable surface or subsurface water access, demonstrated agricultural soil productivity ratings in the highest USDA classification tiers, and sufficient geographic remoteness to ensure both resource security and a degree of infrastructural independence from centralized supply chains. Those 3 criteria, taken together, describe exactly what emergency management and systems resilience science identifies as the foundational requirements for a self-sustaining human settlement capable of functioning under conditions of severe external supply chain disruption. The buyers are not purchasing vacation properties. They are purchasing the physical substrate of long-term survival capacity. The second major driver behind this accelerating acquisition pattern, beyond freshwater security, is food system resilience. The American industrial food system, for all of its extraordinary productive capacity, is simultaneously one of the most efficient and one of the most structurally fragile systems ever engineered at continental scale. It operates on supply chain timescales and inventory buffer margins that leave virtually no room for systemic disruption. The average American grocery store carries approximately 3 days of food inventory under normal demand conditions. The agricultural inputs that make industrial-scale food production possible, synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, pesticides, diesel fuel for farm equipment, and the just-in-time logistics networks that move food from production regions to population centers, are themselves dependent on global supply chains that have demonstrated significant vulnerability to disruption events ranging from geopolitical conflict to extreme weather to pandemic-scale labor and logistics shocks. When sophisticated long-range planners model the compounding failure modes of that system under multi-stressor scenarios, the results consistently point toward the same conclusion: geographic positions with independent food production capacity, reliable water access, and reduced dependence on external supply chains represent a categorically different risk profile than positions of total dependence on the industrial food network. The soil science dimension of this analysis deserves particular emphasis because it is almost entirely absent from mainstream discussions of land value and food security. Not all agricultural land is equal, and the differences are not marginal. They are enormous, and they are becoming more consequential with every passing year of industrial agricultural practice. Decades of monoculture farming, heavy synthetic input application, and inadequate soil organic matter management have degraded the productive capacity of significant portions of American farmland in ways that are not immediately visible in current yield statistics but are measurable through soil biology assessments, organic matter content analysis, and long-range productivity modeling. The land being acquired in the 5 target states includes disproportionately high concentrations of parcels with soil profiles that have either been maintained under lower-intensity agricultural practices or that possess the natural organic matter depth and biological diversity to support restoration to high productivity with appropriate regenerative management. Buyers with access to detailed soil survey data and agricultural productivity modeling are identifying and acquiring these parcels systematically, while the broader market continues to price land primarily on surface characteristics and current use income potential. The energy independence dimension adds yet another layer of strategic logic to the geographic pattern of acquisitions. Several of the target states offer wind and solar resource profiles that make meaningful off-grid or microgrid energy generation feasible at the parcel scale, while also sitting outside the most critically stressed and aging segments of the national electrical grid infrastructure. Grid vulnerability assessments conducted by both government and independent engineering organizations consistently identify large portions of the American Southwest, Southeast, and densely populated Northeast corridor as carrying the highest risk profiles for extended outage events under both extreme weather and infrastructure failure scenarios. Land in regions with lower grid stress exposure, combined with viable renewable generation potential, represents a physical position from which energy independence, or at minimum, dramatically reduced grid dependence, is an achievable engineering outcome rather than a theoretical aspiration. Every one of these converging factors points toward the same urgent and actionable conclusion for ordinary people who are paying attention. The geography of safety and self-sufficiency in a world of compounding systemic stress is not uniformly distributed, and the people with the most sophisticated analytical access to that reality are already acting on it with speed and capital that most individuals cannot match, but whose logic every prepared person can understand and apply at whatever scale their own resources permit.